Book 8. It will tend to avert complacency if you remember that any claim to have lived as a philosopher all your life, or even since reaching manhood, is now out of the question. Indeed, it is as evident to many others as it is to yourself that even today philosophy is still far beyond you. Consequently, your mind remains in a state of confusion as it grows no easier to earn the title of philosopher. Also, your station in life militates constantly against it. Once all this is seen in its true light, you should banish any thought of how you may appear to others and rest content if you can make the remainder of your life what nature would have it to be. Learn to understand her will and let nothing else distract you. Up to now, all your wanderings in search of the good life have been unsuccessful. It was not to be found in the casuistries of logic, nor in wealth, celebrity, worldly pleasures, or anything else. Where then lies the secret? In doing what man's nature seeks. How so? By adopting strict principles for the regulation of impulse and action, such as principles regarding what is good or bad for us. Thus, for example, that nothing can be good for a man unless it helps to make him just, self-disciplined, courageous, and independent, and nothing bad unless it has the contrary effect. Of any action, ask yourself, what will its consequences be to me? Shall I repent of it? Before long I shall be dead, and all will be forgotten. But in the meantime, if this undertaking is fit for a rational and social being who is under the same law as God himself, why look for more? Alexander, Caesar, Pompey, what were they before Diogenes, Heraclitus, Socrates? These last looked at things and their causes and what they are made of, and their master spirits were cast in one mould. But the others, what a host of cares, what an infamy of enslavements! You may break your heart, but men will still go on as before. The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit, for all things must bow to nature's laws, and soon enough you must vanish into nothingness, like Hadrian and Augustus. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are, remembering that it is your duty to be a good man. Do without flinching what man's nature demands. Say what seems to you most just, though with courtesy, modesty, and sincerity. Universal nature's task is to shuffle, transpose, interchange, remove from one stance, and transfer to another. Everywhere there is change, and yet we need fear nothing unexpected, for all things are ruled by age-long want, and even the manner of appointing them does not vary. Every nature finds its satisfaction in the smooth pursuance of its own road. To a nature endowed with reason, this means assenting to no impression that is misleading or obscure, giving rein to no impulse towards actions that are not social, limiting all desires or rejections to things that lie within its own power, and greeting every dispensation of nature with an equal welcome. For these dispensations are as truly a part of her as a leaf's nature is part of the plant's, save that the leaf's is a part of a nature which has no feelings or reason and is capable of being frustrated, while man's nature is part of one which not only cannot be frustrated, but also is endowed with both intelligence and justice, since it assigns to all men equally their proper share of time, being, causation, activity, and experiences. Do not look to find this equality, though, in any exact correspondence between one man and another in every particular, but rather in the general comparison of them both in their entirety. You cannot hope to be a scholar, but what you can do is to curb arrogance. What you can do is to rise above pleasures and pains. You can be superior to the lure of popularity. You can keep your temper with the foolish and ungrateful, yes, and even care for them. Let no one, not even yourself, ever hear you abusing court life again. Repentance is remorse for the loss of some helpful opportunity. Now, what is good is always helpful, and must be the concern of every good man, but an opportunity of pleasure is something no good man would ever repent of having let pass. It follows, therefore, that pleasure is neither good nor helpful. Ask yourself, what is this thing in itself by its own special constitution? What is it in substance and in form and in matter? What is its function in the world? For how long does it subsist? When it is hard to shake off sleep, remind yourself that to be going about the duties you owe society is to be obeying the laws of man's nature and your own constitution, whereas sleep is something we share with the unreasoning brute creation, and furthermore, that obedience to one's own nature is the more proper, the more suitable, and indeed the more agreeable course. If possible, make it a habit to discover the essential character of every impression, its effect on the self, and its response to a logical analysis. No matter whom you meet, always begin by asking yourself what are his views on the goodness or badness of things. For them, if his beliefs about pleasure and pain and their causes, or about repute and disrepute, or life and death are of a certain type, I shall not be surprised or scandalized to find his actions in keeping with them. I shall tell myself he has no choice. Nobody is surprised when a fig tree brings forth figs. Similarly, we ought to be ashamed of our surprise when the world produces its normal crop of happenings. A physician or a shipmaster would blush to be surprised if a patient proves feverish or wind contrary. To change your mind and defer to correction is not to sacrifice your independence, for such an act is your own, in pursuance of your own impulse, your own judgment, and your own thinking. If the choice is yours, why do the thing? If in others, where are you to lay the blame for it? On gods? On atoms? Either would be insanity. All thoughts of blame are out of place. If you can, correct the offender. If not, correct the offence. If that too is impossible, what is the point of recriminations? Nothing is worth doing pointlessly. That which dies does not drop out of the world. Here it remains, and here too, therefore, it changes and is resolved into its several particles, and is into the elements which go to form the universe and yourself. They themselves likewise undergo change, and yet from them comes no complaint. Everything, a horse, a vine, is created for some duty. This is nothing to wonder at. Even the sun god himself will tell you, there is a work that I am here to do, and so will all the other sky dwellers. For what task, then, were you yourself created? For pleasure? Can such a thought be tolerated? Nature always has an end in view, and this aim includes a thing's ending as much as its beginning or its duration. Here is like the ball's thrower. Is the ball itself bettered by its upward flight? Is it any worse as it comes down, or as it lies after its fall? What does a bubble gain by holding together, or lose by collapsing? The like is true of a candle too. Turn this mortal body inside out, and now see the appearance it presents. See what it comes to in old age, or sickness, or decay. How fleeting are the lives of him, alike who praises, and him who is praised, of the rememberer and the remembered. How small their little corner of this terrestrial zone, and even there they are not at all at peace with one another. Nay, the whole earth is itself no more than the puniest dot. Give it the whole of your attention, whether it be a material object, an action, a principle, or the meaning of what is being said. This disappointment serves you right. You would rather hope for goodness tomorrow than practice it today. In what I do, I am to do it with reference to the service of mankind. In what befalls me, I am to accept it with reference to the gods, and to that universal source from which the whole close-linked chain of circumstance has its issue. What do the baths bring to your mind? Oil, sweat, dirt, greasy water, and everything that is disgusting. Such then is life in all its parts, and such is every material thing in it. Death robbed Lucilla of Verus, and later claimed Lucilla too. Death took Maximus from Secunda, and then Secunda herself. Diotimus from Epitinacus, and Epitinacus after him. Faustina from Antonius, and Antonius in his turn. So it is ever. Sulla buries Hadrian, and is buried himself. Those noble minds of old, those men of prescience, those men of pride, where are they now? Keen wits, like Charax, Demetrius the Platonist, Eudaemon, and all others like them, all enduring but for a day, and now long since dead and gone, same forgotten as soon as dead. Some passed into legend, some faded even out of legend itself. Bethink you then how either this complex body of your own must also one day be broken up in dispersions, or else the breath that animates it must be extinguished or removed and translated elsewhere. A man's true delight is to do the things he was made for. He was made to show goodwill to his kind, to rise above the promptings of his senses, to distinguish appearances from realities, and to pursue the study of universal nature and her works. We have three relationships, one to this bodily shell which envelops us, one to the divine cause, which is the source of everything and all things, one to our fellow mortals around us. Pain must be an evil either to the body, in which case let the body speak for itself, or if not, to the soul, but the soul can always refuse to consider it an evil, and so keep its skies unclouded and its calm unruffled. For there is no decision, no impulse, no movement of approach or recoil, but must proceed from within the self, and into the self no evil can force its way. Erasing all fancies, keep on saying to yourself, it lies in my own hands to ensure that no viciousness, cupidity, or turmoil of any kind finds a home in this soul of mine. It lies within me to perceive all things in their true light, and to deal with each of them as it merits. Remember this authority, which is nature's gift to you. Both in the Senate and when addressing individuals, use language that is seemly but not rhetorical. Be sane and wholesome in your speech. Think of the court of Augustus, wife, daughter, children, grandsires, sister, Agrippa, kindred, connections, friends, Aurelius, Mecenus, medical attendants, priests, an entire court, all vanished. Turn to other records of eclipse, extinctions, not of individuals but of whole stocks, the Pompeys for example, and the inscription we see on memorials, the last of this house. Think of all the pains taken by their predecessors to leave an heir after them, and yet in the end someone must be the last, and one more whole race has perished. Your every separate action should contribute towards an integrated life, and if each of them, so far as it can, does its part to this end, be satisfied, for that is something which nobody can prevent. There will be interferences from without, you say. Even so, they will not affect the justice, prudence, and reasonableness of your intentions. No, but some kind of practical action may be prevented, perhaps. Yet if you submit to the frustration with a good grace, and are sensible enough to accept what offers itself instead, you can substitute some alternative course, which will be equally consistent with the integration we are speaking of. Accept modestly, surrender gracefully. You have perhaps seen a severed hand, or foot, or a head lying by itself apart from its body. This is the state to which a man is doing his best to reduce himself when he refuses to accept what befalls him and breaks away from his fellows, or when he acts for selfish ends alone. Then you become an outcast from the unity of nature. Though born a part of it, you have cut yourself away from your own hand. Yet here is the beautiful thought, that it still lies in your own power to reunite yourself. No other part of creation has been so favored by God, with permission to come together again, after once becoming sundered and divided. Behold then his goodness, with which he has dignified man. He has put it in his power, not only initially to keep himself inseparate from the whole, but afterward, if separated, to return and be reunited and resume his membership as before. When the nature of all things rational equipped each rational being with his powers, one of the faculties we received from her hand was this, that just as she herself transmutes every obstacle or opposition, fits it into its place in destiny's pattern, and assimilates it into himself, so a rational being has the power to turn each hindrance into material for himself, and use it to set forward his own endeavors. Never confuse yourself by visions of an entire lifetime at once. That is, do not let your thoughts range over the whole multitude and variety of the misfortunes that may befall you, but rather, as you encounter each one, ask yourself, what is there unendurable, so insupportable in this? You will find that you are ashamed to admit defeat. Again, remember that it is not the weight of the future or the past that is pressing upon you, but ever that of the present alone. Even this burden, too, can be lessened if you confine it strictly to your own limits, and are severe enough with your mind's inability to bear such a trifle. Are Panthea or Pergamos still sitting to this day by the tomb of Verus, Chabrias, or Diomedes by Hadrian's? Ridiculous! And supposing they were, would the dead be sensible of it, or if sensible pleased? Moreover, even if the dead themselves were pleased, could the mourners, for their part, be expected to go on living forever? Were not they likewise doomed to become old men and old women, and to pass away in their turn? And then, what could the mourned do, when their mourners were no more? And all this for nothing more than a bagful of stench and corruption. In the words of Crito the sage, if thou hast eyes to see, then see. In the constitution of a rational being, I find no virtue implanted for the combating of justice, but I do find self-control implanted for the combating of pleasure. Subtract your own notions of what you imagine to be painful, and then yourself stands invulnerable. Myself, what is it? Your reason. But I am not all reason. So be it. In that case, at least let your reason forbear to give pain to itself, and if another part of you is in trouble, let its thoughts about itself be its own concern. To the nature of the vital force animating our bodies, any frustration of the senses is an evil, and so is the frustration of any endeavor. The nature of a plant has likewise its own frustrations and its evils, and in the same way any frustration of the mind is an evil to the nature of the mind. Apply all this to your own case. Does a pain affect you, or a pleasure? The senses will see to that. Have you been balked in an endeavor? It is true that if it was made without any allowance for possible failure, such frustration is indeed an evil to you as a rational being. However, once you accept a universal necessity, you can suffer no harm and no frustration. Within its own domain there is nobody who can frustrate the mind. Fire, sword, oppression, calumny, and all else are powerless to touch it. The globe, once orbed and true, remains a sphere. I, who have never wilfully pained another, have no business to pain myself. To each his own felicity. For me, soundness of sovereign faculty, reason, no shrinking from mankind and its vicissitudes, the ability to survey and accept all things with a kindly eye, and to deal with them according to their deserts. Make the best of today. Those who aim instead at tomorrow's plaudits fail to remember that future generations will be no wise different from the contemporaries who so try their patience now, and no wise less mortal. In any case, can it matter to you how the tongues of posterity may wag, or what views of yourself it may entertain? Take me and cast me where you will, I shall still be possessor of the divinity within me, serene and content, so long as it can feel and act as becomes its constitution. In the matter of such moment that my soul should be afflicted by it, and changed for the worse, to become a cowering craven thing, suppliant and spiritless, could anything at all be of such consequence as that? No event can happen to a man but what is properly incidental to man's condition, not to an ox, vine, or stone, but what properly belongs to the nature of oxen, vines, and stones. Then if all things experience only what is customary and natural to them, why complain? The same nature which is yours as well as theirs brings you nothing you cannot bear. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your own estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. If the cause of the trouble lies in your own character, set about reforming your principles. Who is there to hinder you? If it is the failure to take some apparently sound course of action that is vexing you, then why not take it instead of fretting? Because there is an insuperable obstacle in the way. In that case, do not worry, the responsibility for an action is not yours. But life is not worth living with this thing undone. Why then, bid life a good-humoured farewell, accepting the frustration gracefully, and dying like any other man whose actions have not been inhibited. Remember that your higher self becomes invincible when once it withdraws into itself and calmly refuses to act against its will, even though such resistance may be wholly irrational. How much more, then, when its decision is based on reason and circumspection? Thus, a mind that is free from passion is a very citadel. Man has no stronger fortress in which to seek shelter and defy every assault. Failure to perceive this is ignorance, but to perceive it and still not to seek its refuge is misfortune indeed. Never go beyond the sense of your original impressions. These tell you that such and such a person is speaking ill of you. That was their message. They did not go on to say, "It has done you any harm. I see my child is ill. My eyes tell me that." But they do not suggest that his life is in danger. Always then, keep to the original impressions. Supply no additions of your own, and you are safe. Or at least, add only a recognition of the great world order by which all things are brought to pass. Is your cucumber bitter? Throw it away. Are there briars in your path? Turn aside. That is enough. Do not go on to say, "Why were things of this sort ever brought into the world?" The student of nature will only laugh at you. just as a carpenter or a shoemaker would laugh if you found fault with the shavings and scraps from their work, which you saw in the shop. Yet they, at least, have somewhere to throw their litter, whereas nature has no such outplace. That is the miracle of her workmanship, that in spite of this self-limitation, she nevertheless transmutes into herself everything that seems worn out or old or useless, and refashions it into new creations so as never to need either fresh supplies from without or a place to discard her refuse. Her own space, her own materials, or her own skill are sufficient for her. Dilatory action, incoherent conversation, vague impressions, a soul too inwardly cramped, a soul too outwardly effusive, a life without room for leisure, avoid such things. Martyrdom, mutilation, execration, how can they affect the mind's ability to remain pure, sane, temperate, just? A man may stand by a clear spring of sweet water and heap abusive words upon it, yet it still goes on welling up fresh and wholesome. He may even cast in mire and filth, but it will quickly dissolve them and wash them away, and show no stain. How be lord yourself of such a perennial fountain? By safeguarding the right to be your own master every hour of the day, in all charity, simplicity, and modesty. Without an understanding of the nature of the universe, a man cannot know where he is. Without an understanding of its purpose, he cannot know what he is, know what the universe itself is. Let either of these discoveries be hid from him, and he will not be able so much as to give a reason for his own existence. So what are we to think of anyone who cares to seek or shun the applause of the shouting multitudes, when they know neither where they are, nor what they are? Would you wish for the praise of one who thrice an hour calls down curses on his own head? Would you please one who cannot even please himself? And how can a man be pleased with himself when he repents of well nigh everything he does? As your breathing partakes of the circumfluent air, so let your thinking partake in the circumfluent mind. For there is a mental force which, for him who can draw it to himself, is no less ubiquitous and all-pervading than is the atmosphere for him who can breathe it. The general wickedness of mankind cannot injure the universe, nor can the particular wickedness of one man injure a fellow man. It harms none but the culprit himself, and he can free himself from it as soon as he so chooses. My neighbour's will is of no greater concern to my will than his breath or his flesh. No matter how much we are made for one another, still each man's self has its own sovereign rights. Otherwise, my neighbour's wickedness would become my evil, and God has not willed this, lest the ruin of my happiness should lie at another's disposal. The sun is seen to pour down and expand itself in all directions, yet is never exhausted. For this downpouring is but a self-extension. Sunbeams, in fact, derive their very name from a word signifying to be extended. To understand the property of a sunbeam, watch the light as it streams into a darkened room through a narrow chink. It prolongs itself forward in a straight line until it is held up by encountering some solid body which blocks its passage to the air beyond. And then it remains at rest there, without slipping off or falling away. The emission and the diffusion of thought should be the counterpart of this, not exhausting but simply extending itself, not dashing violently or furiously against the obstacles it encounters, nor yet falling away in despair, but holding its ground and lighting up that upon which it rests. Failure to transmit it is a mere self-deprivation of life. He who fears death either fears to lose all sensation or fears new sensations. In reality, you will either feel nothing at all and therefore nothing evil, or else, if you can feel any new sensations, you will be a new creature and so will not have ceased to have life. Men exist for each other, then either improve them or put up with them. An arrow travels in one fashion, but the mind in another. Even when the mind is feeling its way cautiously and working round the problem from every angle, it is still moving directly onwards and making for its goal. Enter into the ruling principle of your neighbour's mind, and suffer him to enter into yours.